Hey guys, welcome back to another week of the Life's Worth Living podcast. I'm your host, John Gossett, and as you can see, today we're not in GTM Builders Model Home in Tooele Valley. We are at the Utah State Capitol. I'm excited to be here, but I do want to give a big shout out to GTM Builders. They are Tooele County's premier home builder. They've got 4 model homes in the valley. If you're thinking about building, reach out to GTM and check them out online, gtmbuilders.com. This episode is brought to you by A. Warner Homes Real Estate. If you're thinking about buying or selling, reach out to A. Warner Homes Real Estate, and they'd be happy to help you. Give them a call at 801-867-5078. So I'm excited to introduce my guest. This guy is one of the hardest workers at the state capitol. He's always doing something. He's got ties to Tooele County. He married well,
That's right.
And he's a buddy of mine. So I'd like to introduce to you Utah State Attorney General Sean Reyes.
Hi, John. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks for having me here.
Is there like a nickname for the people who listen to your podcast, like Gossett's Gang or something?
Man, I wish I was that cool.
Well, I maybe just gave you one. I don't know.
Nice.
And I know that you have the listeners around the world. Congratulations, and certainly nationally, and a lot right here in our great state of Utah.
I'm a Utah boy. I love it here. So. Well, and like I said, we've had the pleasure of working with you. You've been a big champion for suicide prevention, and Foundation appreciates all you do for us and all you do for the suicide prevention here in the state of Utah.
Thank you. It's been a privilege to work with you and your team and many others in this fight, because it's really a fight to try to make sure that we have enough resources and that we raise awareness and that we wake people up to this challenge that confronts everyone. There's no community that's immune. And, this is not for me, even though I'm a elected official, this is not a political issue. This is a humanitarian issue. It's not a partisan issue, a Democrat or Republican issue. It's a people issue, a life issue. Yes. And so this is critically important. You asked me one time, what was it like when you first came into office? And interestingly, when I came into office, they said, what are the things you're going to focus on? What are your priorities? And immediately I had 4. One was to fight white collar fraud, a lot of senior citizens and folks getting rooked in scams and schemes. But the other ones were when I saw how many of our young people were dying by suicide. It was the number 1 cause of death, more than the next 3 causes of death combined. I was overwhelmed, and I said, I want to make this one of my priorities. Another was fighting modern-day slavery and combating human trafficking. And then the third was, which I think is somewhat related to all of those, was the opioid epidemic. And at the time, it's still happening right now, but we're maybe starting to get a little bit more of a foothold in combating that. But at the time, it was ravaging communities across the nation. And interestingly, I hired some consultants out of Washington, D.C., who came back and said, you should keep the white collar stuff and focus on that. That tests well. They did focus groups and they did surveys, and that passes the feel good test. The other stuff, you sound like the 4th horseman of the apocalypse. No one wants to talk to you about sex slavery and people dying of drugs and suicide. And I fired them. And said, you know what? Let me find the people like you, John, who are out there saving lives every day. Because even if, they did warn me. They said, you're going to be the shortest tenured attorney general if you stick with those things. And I said, I'm not in this for, long-term political gain. That's not why I decided to try my hand at public service. So if I can make a difference, and even if it's just 1 term, let's do it. And was so fortunate to meet you and others to really help me understand even better how to approach this very sensitive, difficult situation. And you and I have had discussions, too, about why it's happening. And I still don't know exactly all the reasons why it's happening, but we didn't want to wait to figure that out. I think too often, especially in government, it's great. We'll have commissions, committees, and we'll sit and think and talk about it. But we wanted to do something right away. And so your foundation was born, and it was incredible, and it's done so much. We created other resources like the Safe UT app in Utah and a 3-digit call-in number for not physical emergencies like 911, but mental behavioral health emergencies. And we just wanted to roll up our sleeves and start to empower our people with resources, because it's a conversation that I think too many people avoided for too long. It's uncomfortable. It's embarrassing to many people. They feel ashamed when we're talking about mental health issues or behavioral health issues like death by suicide or depression, or many of those precursors, the things that could lead someone to take their own life or to lash out and hurt somebody else. I don't think we've done a good job as a nation at addressing those things. I don't think we've been very honest with ourselves. And part of what we've tried to do in my office and encourage working with groups like yours is to take away the stigma and the shame of being able to have these real conversations and say these things happen to everyone. Yeah. It doesn't matter how much money you have or education, where you live, rural, urban, suburban. These things are just part of our human existence, and we have to be there for each other, stay connected, find ways to lift and empower each other. And so that's why I'm so glad that you have this podcast and you're able to reach out to people around the world to let them know.
Well, and I'm proud of what we've done as a state. You mentioned the Safe UT app. How many lives has that saved? Yeah. I mean, you can't even begin to count them. I mean, it's a big deal, and a lot of states could probably do well by mimicking or following in our lead and doing what's being done here, because we are making headway.
A lot of states have reached out to us. Yeah. I remember Senate hearings that they had where they called me, Senator Thatcher, and others back to testify about what Utah was doing, why we were having so much success. Now, again, it's relative. We still have too many people whose lives are lost, but we're doing better. And I think we have some things that we've hit upon that work very well. The magic behind the Safe UT app isn't the technology. The interface is fairly straightforward. It's the back end that we have mental behavioral health experts on call 24/7 for our young people. Anytime that they're in crisis or they have a friend or loved one who's in crisis, they have a lifeline where they don't just call a number where there's a phone tree and leave a message. It's somebody who knows how to talk to them or text with them, because that's mostly what teens do these days. And it has saved countless lives. It is so gratifying. If I've done nothing else in my tenure of time, just the notes and the letters that we get to see back is that I wouldn't be alive without the Safe UT app and the people on the other end, the angels who were able to intervene. And we've expanded it beyond just, elementary, junior high, high school. Now it's in higher education. And beyond that, we have our military, and we're starting to add first responders. My hope and dream has always been that everyone in Utah will have access to a tool like Safe UT so that they can, no matter what situation they find themselves in, find a lifeline to help them overcome whatever challenges they may be having. And then beyond that, we tried to get past a 3-digit number in Utah. And I know some of your past guests have talked about that because I've worked with them at the time, and we weren't able to immediately. Again, it was a raw subject. People just didn't really want to talk about it, and I don't think they realized the impact that number could have. So instead, we created the Safe UT app to give Utah some kind of lifeline, and then we worked with our federal delegation, Senator Orrin Hatch, Representative Chris Stewart. They were champions, and they were terrific, and their teams really helped us get legislation passed that has now been signed into law by President Trump. It's been adopted by the FCC. Ajit Pai, my friend there, who's the chairman of the FCC, has designated a number. It exists. It's 988, just like 911. Now, here's the trick. When 911 first came online, it wasn't like every state immediately had the infrastructure and back end to support 911. It took a while to build that up, and it will be the same for 988. But imagine right now, it's a sea change. It's historic. We have a number that hopefully 10 years from now, 20 years from now, people will treat it the same way we have 911. 911 is just a part of our subconscious. You know, if you're in physical harm or danger, call 911 for an emergency. Well, 911 isn't the greatest tool if you're depressed, or if you're ideating suicide, or if your child's on the spectrum and you don't know how to interact with, say, law enforcement, or there's lots of different issues that come up every day. And now we have 988 to help prevent suicide, to help people become more aware, to help empower them to feel like somebody cares and that life is worth living, to your motto. It's, to me, so exciting. And of course, there'll always be naysayers. Well, it's not available immediately. It's not, but it's incremental, and we had to get
towards it.
We're absolutely working towards that, and it's going to take too long. Well, government sometimes takes a while. That's why I'm running for re-election, so I can try to make sure that we see this to the end and expedite this and finish this, because I can't tell you how much I'm passionate about those types of resources. I've seen what Safe UT could do just in Utah alone. This number, it's not a panacea. It's not going to solve every issue or problem. It's not going to be the answer to everything. But I've got to believe it's going to save a lot of lives, and it's going to help a lot of people get the assistance and support that they need. There'll be warm handoffs to mental health experts, to behavioral health clinics, to resources that right now people just don't know are available, and if they do, they don't know how to access them. And so that is exciting to me. And again, those priorities, focusing on trying to prevent suicide, help people become aware, connecting them. It's related a lot to the opioid epidemic that we've seen, and to the human trafficking that I referenced earlier.
Well, before we move on to those, the one thing I failed to mention was you were so instrumental in helping us in Tooele when we were in a race to place the first veterans monument that's dedicated to suicide. Yeah. We wanted that to be here. We wanted it to be something that families of our veterans and veterans that are struggling, that have come home, can actually go there, and there's plaques on the pedestal that direct them to different resources. And so we can't thank you enough as a foundation for what you did for us to help get that placed. And what a special day that was. It was
that was an amazing,
that was a cool day
initiative, and your leadership on that was so commendable. I love our men and women in uniform, those who've served, those who are serving, those who will serve. And our veteran community is being ravaged by mental behavioral health challenges, death by suicide. The PTSD alone is so difficult. And it's amazing to me that we have these mottos when they're out in combat. We leave no man left behind. And we'll all sorts of mottos in English and Latin about being there and protecting. And then somehow when they come home, we forget about them, and they fall through the cracks, and they're battling these demons that they'll have for the rest of their lives because of their service to our nation. And the rate of suicide, death by suicide amongst veterans, is staggering. Yes. And I've seen so many different statistics. We've lost more to suicide than we had in combat from the Gulf War.
Yeah, I believe it's over 4 times. Now, 4 to 1.
That is.
And Vietnam was 3 to 1. I think the numbers were 58,220 to combat. Yeah. But we've lost over 170,000 as of the date that we placed the statue.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I didn't want to overstate it. I was going to say 2 or 3 times, but you're saying 4 times.
3 times in Vietnam, and I think in the Gulf, So.
Well, it's one of the reasons we created a program called At Ease here in Utah for free legal advice to our veterans. But that community definitely needs our support. One thing I'll mention, because I talk about all these things a little bit fluidly, because I think underlying a lot of why people are addicted to drugs or end up thinking about taking their lives is that they're suffering immense pain, whether that pain is physical, emotional, mental, or a combination of all of those things. And I co-produce a show on A&E called Addiction Unplugged. We had a great first season. A&E wants us to do a second season. COVID's kind of shut things down temporarily, but we will. And our focus was not on watching people die from addictions or like some other shows, maybe the really dark. Our focus was a very hopeful look at all the people who've overcome addiction and been able to lift others. And we have one episode. The reason I bring it up is because so many of our vets are suffering from what I mentioned before, PTSD or other challenges. And some of them respond to that by taking their own lives or harming themselves in other ways. Some of them respond to it by taking drugs to try to numb the pain and dull that reality of the pain. So either way, they end up in these very dark places. And this show, Addiction Unplugged, the purpose was to try to help people understand why they're doing that so we can empower them and help them out of that dark place, inspire them, hold their hand, love them, make sure that we're with them. And so, again, I brought that up. It sounds like a plug for my show. It's not, but you can watch the back episodes. I commend that. It was our most watched episode, the episode on veterans and the challenges that they had. And we mentioned in that episode the death by suicide being such a reality for combat veterans, and not just those who've seen combat, but others. And of course, the focus was also on drug addiction and the opioid epidemic specifically. But it really touches on a lot of the other challenges that we see, homelessness, intergenerational poverty, becoming victimized by could be traffickers. Why? Because they feel so badly about them. They feel like they have nothing left to give, and then all of a sudden, a trafficker comes and is able to convince them, "Hey, here's a way to make money, or here's a way to stay alive," and they become victimized. All of these things, I think, emanate from that same struggle as a human being to want to feel whole and part of something, connected to something bigger. We often talk about in the recovery world, treatment and recovery, when we're talking about addictions, that the antidote to addiction, is really connection, right? I mean, that's what people often think it's sobriety, or it's what's the opposite. Well, it's really, the answer is feeling like you have something to give, feeling like you are worth something. And I think that underpins so much of the conversations that we unfortunately don't have enough of. And again, it's just why this podcast and this program's, I think, essential for people, programs like this, to participate in.
Well, this year, 2020, man, have we had trouble connecting. We got our faces covered with masks. We're keeping to ourselves. We're not going out the way that we have. And so, I mean,
and we were covered. Like, I don't know if this is technically 6 feet, but we've just tested each other. You passed our office protocols, so I think we're good. I'm glad you bring up COVID, because to that point, it really has hampered our ability to stay connected. Mm-hmm. We see it. I know I'm kind of pivoting off because my office covers so many different areas, and I deal with the best of the best, people like yourselves, like you and others who give so much. And then I deal with some of the worst crime and darkness and the sort of depravity of humanity. And so I just tend to pivot all over. COVID has wreaked havoc, not just on our economy, not just on our health, but on the vulnerability of our citizens, and particularly our children. The amount of referrals that we're getting from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, those are our partners. There's a hotline. These are vetted tips that mean that children are in danger of being exploited directly physically or through online grooming to then be exploited more. Child pornography, streaming from their very own bedrooms, these young kids, as young as, infant age. It's horrible. And the number of referrals have increased exponentially. Why? Because perps, these predators, they're savvy. they are terrorists, and they know exactly how to manipulate people, and they know that parents are now contending with, maybe 2 or 3 children at home on different devices trying to do schoolwork, and they're so vulnerable. Parents mostly don't realize how vulnerable their kids, even teens or young adults, can be to perpetrators, and the devices that they'll use, the stratagems to take a person's face, even just off of an innocent social media post, and use a program that's free and deep fake it, rip that face and put it onto, say, a nude body of someone else, but then leverage that. Talk to that teen. It could be a high school teenager. It could be the captain of the football team. We've seen situations like that here in Utah that have led to death by suicide. They say, "Hi, I've got this photo, and if I show this to your father's work, he'll lose his business. If I take this to your pastor or your priest or your bishop, you'll be kicked out of your parish or your congregation." And so they leverage it. And what do they ask in return? Well, take some real photos of yourself or a video of yourself without your clothes on. Or then it leverages up into a sex act, and then I'll destroy everything that I have here. Do you just send me that? Well, of course I don't destroy it. When they get the next one, then they leverage that. And pretty soon that child is in such a compromising position because they're forcing that child, again, with more threats that they're going to hurt their younger brother or their grandmother. And human beings will suffer almost any pain or indignity to protect the people that they love. And they know that. These predators know that. And they consistently have these schemes to get innocent children and even adults into these positions of vulnerability, and then it just escalates more and more and more. That's how it can leverage up into being a human trafficking case, not an abduction, not like Elizabeth Smart's case, where she's taken physically and removed from her home. It can happen in their home without their parents even knowing it, while their parents are out at work, and they're, videotaping and streaming live pornography that they're monetizing around the world. And I know if some of your listeners are probably thinking, the AG's just sensationalizing. I wish I were. I wish I was making this stuff up, and I wish this were, just the stuff of fiction. But this is my reality. These are the cases that we see, and we see them far too often. That's why we tell parents all the time to be really, really careful with their kids about what they're letting them talk to them. Don't be so harsh and judge them so much and have your kids be so afraid that they can't come to you, even if they've made a mistake. And of course, I'm not saying don't hold them accountable and that there isn't a place for discipline. But when kids are too afraid to go to their parents, who do they go to? When they're bullied. Bullying is such a driver for death by suicide, and we see it every day in schools. Almost all of my school presentations, which are a number of them, high schools, junior high schools, elementary schools, it's about not bullying and finding ways to feel good about yourself by lifting other people up and standing up to the bullies and defending them. Because unlike the days when you and I were growing up, and you're a little bit younger than I am, but
whatever.
I grew up in a pretty tough neighborhood where I was born, and there were lots of gangs and there was lots of drugs. And you knew that if you made it into your house, you crossed certain streets, and that you didn't get beat up by then, you were safe, right? Yeah. My dad had shotguns, and you were safe in your home. Well, now today, there's no hiding anywhere. It's almost worse in their home, because then they're online and they're getting bombarded by cyberbullying, which is just pernicious form of bullying. It's, again, I'm going to reveal to everybody, even if it's not true, all of these things about you, that you're a slut, that you slept with so-and-so, or that we have these pictures, again, putting a girl and a boy together who never even were dating. And it's just unbelievable. And these kids, I don't understand, because I haven't personally experienced that level of terror in my life. But on a certain level, I can understand why, if they're being just terrorized that much, and it's so painful, why they might think it may be better just not to be alive tomorrow.
And with electronics today, it doesn't sleep. I mean, it's not like you got home from school and, like you said, we were safe once we were in our walls of our own home. But man, that can go 24 hours a day.
Yeah, it happens to adults. I mean, it's just not. I mean, it's so strong and powerful that we've seen these, and we've seen cases of suicide and cases of human trafficking and other cases. And again, everybody reacts and responds differently. Some are, again, to blunt the pain, take drugs. And that's maybe an effective short-term coping mechanism for them. We know that's not a very good long-term strategy. Certainly, sometimes in short-term it isn't either, because they end up dying. But in terms of dulling the pain, that's what they're trying to accomplish when veterans or victimized teenagers, or a soccer mom suffering from depression, or a business dad who feels like he's failed because he's lost his job and he can't provide for his family. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. There is a lot of underlying pain. And if they're not equipped to deal with that pain, or they're not aware of resources that are available, or that people as a community will lift them in their time of need, it's a really, really lonely road. And I've talked to many, many victims, or many people who've attempted suicide, and it's harrowing. It's heartbreaking to hear about just how much pain there is. I don't think, unless you've experienced that level of emotional, mental torment on top of physical pain. I think everybody's experienced physical pain of some sort, but it's just overwhelming. And, as they describe it to me, it's just this crushing darkness that overpowers you. And that's why I want to keep talking about it, even though it's hard. And even though I probably don't get it. And my wife's like, we don't get invited to any social events anymore, because you're like that old character from Peanuts, Pigpen or something, he always had this like cloud of dust around him. And they're like, yeah, you're always talking about these. But I talk about them because I want people to confront them in a way. I don't want them to be fearful. I just want them to realize that these things are the reality of the.
And they might not even realize it. You mentioned you don't want people to think you're sensationalizing it, but the war on drugs and the war on human trafficking are the two highest monetized things. I think we were talking $32 billion a year for sex trafficking.
And that's I honestly believe that number is very low. That's deflated because
you don't know all of them.
We don't know. It's hard to get real numbers.
Yeah.
I say this, I've said this in the TED Talks, I've said this in other presentations. Of course, I'm saying it in jest, because we don't actually have a survey monkey that goes out to perpetrators, but I joke, they don't respond to our surveys or our requests for information. So it's hard to get real-time data. But anecdotally, all the cases that we do know, that we work on, that we investigate, that we prosecute, whether it's human trafficking cases, drug interdiction, or a lot of times both, what people don't realize is that...
So intertwined.
Yeah, at least half of our human trafficking cases also involve drug trafficking. But what the traffickers have realized over the years, and one of the reasons why human trafficking has just spiked, no one knows whether human trafficking or drug trafficking are the most lucrative, right? According to the $32 billion, it says it's still behind drug trafficking. Who knows? I think it might have surpassed it. Why? Because you can only sell drugs once. Yeah. That's what traffickers themselves, who we've arrested, have told us. You can only sell drugs once, but you can sell a little boy or girl, not just dozens of times, but hundreds or thousands of times. I've testified in different Congresses, not just in our United States, but other countries, with victims who've talked about the number of times that they've been abused in the thousands or tens of thousands over a number of years. But it's horrible. It could be 10 times a day or 10 times a night on the border with 15-minute increments, where they just get the John gets handed a slip, and they kind of, it's like a MASH unit, and they go in there and abuse these underage victims, and it's just horrific. So I don't know really, truly, which one, but also it doesn't matter at that point. I do know this: human trafficking has increased. It's the fastest growing and continues to be global crime, because I believe, well, one, the number of human lives has expanded exponentially. And it's an almost unending supply of, you can just go grab more kids off the street. You know that right now. And I've worked in this great country. I love the people. I love the culture. But it has serious challenges. In Nigeria, there are, I believe, 2.5 to 3 million children who've lost both parents to HIV, to the AIDS virus. So who's taking care of them? Nobody. They're on their own on the streets. And if you're an enterprising trafficker, all you got to do is come there with some candy or a phone or new phone, or you can pick up 4 or 5 of those kids who don't have anyone to protect them and immediately commoditize them. And there was a study, a Scandinavian study, I can't remember exactly, but the gist of it was you can make about $250,000 US, even in a third world country, I believe, by selling a human being for sex annually. So, you could be a king in a third world country by going and grabbing some of these kids off of the streets there. Now, people say, yeah, that's Nigeria. That's not happening here in the U.S. Well, yes, it is. It's happening here. Even though the United States has a lot of different initiatives today focused on fighting human trafficking, it hasn't historically. And this is going back to my initial premise. I believe the reason why human trafficking has grown exponentially, in addition to the supply of human beings, is that there's so little risk of you being caught, prosecuted, that why would you sell drugs when there are organizations and agencies like the Drug Enforcement Administration, whose only mission is to interdict,
take them down,
and take down drug dealers, drug traffickers? Where's the human trafficking? Where's the heat? And so if you're doing the calculus as an enterprising trafficker and you're like, I can sell drugs, I can sell little boys and girls. Little boys and girls easier to get than the drugs sometimes. I mean, their whole nations will go to war over drugs. Some nations are inadvertently aiding and abetting the trafficking of kids or adults. And then you can monetize this one over and over and over and over again. So this one, not so much. This one's got, agencies tracking us, Interpol all over. It's no wonder that human trafficking has grown at the rate that it has over the last 20, 30 years. There have been laws against it, but it exists in every country. And so it's hard because when I talk to people and when I first started to raise the alarm about this, even in our state, which has been incredibly receptive and responsive, we went from an F to an A in just 6 short years from Shared Hope International, which is an organization that kind of grades the states in the union about how well they're doing comprehensively, from passing laws to empowering victims and survivors to law enforcement tools, everything. And we literally were failing, and now we're doing really well. Even here in Utah, I still have a lot of people saying, yeah, just this, I don't think it can really happen in our, well, it is, it's happening. And they don't believe it's as serious as it is. I thought slavery was outlawed. Well, it is. I mean, slavery, in U.S. history, and I want to make this point. It's a sensitive one, but I use it to illustrate the severity and pervasiveness of the problem. I am in no way trying to lessen the stain and blight that the transatlantic slave trade was on our nation's history and our world history. It's horrific. Millions of people whose lives were just uprooted, torn away from their culture, their roots, their families, brought to different countries, sold in slavery. Horrible. But by most scholarly accounts, the number of people who were enslaved over the 250, 300 years of the transatlantic slave trade number about 12.5, 13 million people. That's a big number. Yeah. By a lot of conservative numbers today, many different organizations have pegged the number of modern day slaves right now, as you and I are speaking, at multiples of that, 25 million, 40 million, 80 million. Again, we don't know exactly, but we have a pretty good idea that there are more modern day slaves today on Earth than ever before. And again, some of the same reasons. Anyone is potentially a victim, but those that are hyper vulnerable are the same kids that are hyper vulnerable to maybe ending up using drugs. Maybe some of the same kids that ideate suicide at a higher rate because they've been marginalized by society. They've been judged. They've been cast off, so to speak, if you will. And so they don't feel good about themselves. They're suffering a lot of pain. And here comes again an enterprising trafficker, much like it doesn't have to be in Nigeria. It can now be in Tooele County, Utah. It can be in everywhere USA. And they come and tell them that they're worth something and that they're going to be everything to them. And the kids believe them. Why wouldn't they? And then pretty soon they don't realize that these folks don't have their best interest at heart. They're just traffickers, and they want to exploit them, and they're selling them. And they may take them to a different state. They may take them to a different country. But they're hyper vulnerable. And so I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that we really are vigilant, especially with our youth, our kids, to make sure that we can help identify those who are vulnerable and offer them support and resources and not do things that would drive them into the hands of drugs, traffickers, or suicide. And again, I don't think those three things are necessarily totally intertwined, but there are definitely kind of tendrils that underlie a lot of the drivers that end up seeing. I mean, one thing that we haven't talked about, but which was a sort of a secondary benefit of creating the Safe UT app, is that, and it's not something that I think we thought about immediately would be such a big deal, but we also, there's a function that if there's an immediate threat at school, someone brought a knife, someone brought a gun, that
school attack,
they can text in as well. So it doesn't just have to be, hey, I'm in a deep depression, or I'm cutting myself, or I have an eating disorder. All of those things, they certainly can text in and get help for immediately. But I heard my friend say he's going to get even with these bullies, and he's bringing his dad's gun to school. Texting, it goes directly to the school resource officer and triangulates. Typically, the calls don't go to law enforcement. They go to our, as you know, suite of highly qualified, world-renowned, mental behavioral health experts at the University of Utah Neuropsychiatric Institute. But when they're talking about on-school potential violence, straight in, and we have intervened in dozens. I mean, it could be at this point, I know just from the last few years, it's been hundreds of cases where someone brought a credible threat, knife, gun, bomb, something to school to get even. Why? Or just to make a statement. Why? I think for a lot of the same reasons that some people take, again, that choose death by suicide. Some choose to cope with that pain by hurting other people. And it's sad, but the root of that, again, a lot of that on us as a society. What are we doing to educate our children on mental behavioral health challenges, and what are we doing to empower them, and how are we equipping them to deal with that? And the difficulty from a political standpoint that I see, it doesn't matter if it's, again, Republicans and Democrats, is that to really do something, just like this 988 number that I'm talking about, it took years for us to get that to this point, and it's going to take years to get to the next point. And politics is largely driven by the next election cycle, which could be 2 years, 4 years. It's largely driven by kind of the immediate pressures. And dealing with mental behavioral health challenges is a very long-term prospect. And certainly there's some short-term things we can do, create Safe UT, but to do it the right way, we have to invest as a people and a nation and as a world long-term, and that's really difficult. It's difficult when you're worried about, hey, am I going to get reelected in 2 years? Much less, 16 years down the road. If we really need to invest in that, what's going to be the biggest return on my investment politically? Allocate money to something that my constituents may not understand and they may not see benefits for until years down the road, or do something right now that they can see and reward me for. And so I think that has been a challenge. And again, I'm not calling out any individual person in politics. I just think overall we have to come together and realize federal, state, local, Democrat, Republican, human family, United States, and the rest of the world, that these are very long-term issues. If we're going to do them right, we have to start the infrastructure and build now for the future, and to help along the way, of course, or we'll be dealing with these same issues and not solving them, for who knows how long.
It's kind of like that phrase, when's the best time to build or plant a tree? 20 years ago, right?
That's right. That's right.
I mean, unless we get started with it, those outcomes that we're sure we're going to see are never going to come. So, man, wow. Yeah.
Well, human trafficking, you asked me, and I don't know, I'm looking at the time that we've had. We've got about 15, 20 minutes left. You wanted me to talk about maybe some of the operations that we do.
Yeah, I don't think most people understand that you've kind of been behind the scenes. This has been a major focus for you, and you've been boots on the ground. You've been in situations where you're rescuing those children. So when people say, well, if anybody was thinking that this being sensationalized, you know firsthand.
Yeah, I can speak to it from firsthand knowledge, certainly. Let me split it out this way. There are cases that I've been intimately involved with that our office, the Office of Attorney General for the state of Utah, has jurisdiction for. And because we have law enforcement assets, investigators that put these cases together, and prosecutors that prosecute human trafficking cases, and I lead all of that, I'm involved in everything that the state of Utah does in terms of cases that we bring as a state for human trafficking. And I have seen, when I first came into office, this was, again, just such a striking, almost unbelievable thing for me. We had a tip that there was a human trafficking case in West Valley City, which is a small, quiet suburb on the west side of Salt Lake City, middle-class neighborhood, great community. But a friend of mine called me to tell me, I'm a brand new Attorney General. This is 2014. I had just been sworn in December 30th of 2013. And he says, I think my friend's son is being human trafficked. And I had heard of human trafficking. I'd worked a little bit with the FBI on human trafficking. And I said, yeah, here? Like, are you kidding? Right here? Yeah. And he was right. Come to find out, for 15 years, this notorious international MS-13 shot caller had been in here in West Valley City, exercising his reign of terror with hundreds and hundreds of victims, mostly young boys. He had a predilection towards young boys and exploiting them sexually. But he also forced them to mule his drugs, which he imported from Central and South America. And so he was a drug trafficker and a human trafficker, and he would abuse these kids and force them to mule drugs, not just in high schools and junior high schools, but even elementary schools. And we actually wired up a very brave individual who went and helped us get the evidence against him. We arrested this suspect and his Confederates, and interestingly got a call from the federal government that said, hey, congratulations, heard you guys arrested Victor Rax. You'll never get a witness to testify against that guy because they always end up dead or like disappeared. They're gone. Like, what? Really? Like, that's interesting. We've arrested that guy 6 times. This individual had been arrested 6 different times by the United States government. And they said, well, what did you do with him? Well, we deported him. That was the protocol. So they deport him. Well, what does he do? He just comes in under another alias 6 weeks later, 2 months later, and just continues and picks up where he left off. In fact, he didn't have to be here present. He was just running the ring remotely, and then he'd come back and be here. And he was, again, a terrorist. He just knew how to manipulate these young boys. He would abuse them sexually or sell them for sex in their own home. And again, their parents are working 3 jobs trying to make ends meet. Many of these were Latino kids. A lot of them were immigrant families, working hard, terrific families. And this guy would take like a dog of theirs out in the alley and say, look, this is what I'm going to do to your mom if you don't, continue, and shoot the dog. And so you think any 13-year-old kid's going to risk his mom's life in that situation, and so they just went over. And this is happening for 15 years, and the guy keeps getting arrested. And so finally, we talked to the feds and said, hey, I know that's the protocol, but why don't we not deport him this time? And let's prosecute him under the U.S. justice system. Let us try to put him away forever. Life sentence or death penalty, we can get that. And they said, okay. And so thankfully, they deferred deportation. And I think Victor Rax finally realized he wasn't going to escape this time. When we filed our information, I think we had 40 witnesses who were willing to testify at that point, and they had pointed out another 200 witnesses. Some of these folks these are hardened kids. They grew up, some of them in gangs, and they're 27 years old, but they were 12 when this started, and they all wanted the chance to confront their accuser. And Rax ended up hanging himself during the pendency of the trial. So that was probably the one suicide that I've only ever in my life thought, that might be a good thing. But here's the interesting thing, John. I thought that the victims would be happy because I was telling them there's no legal wrangling now. There's no extradition. There's nothing that can save him. He's never going to hurt you again. He's never going to terrorize our communities, our schools again. And on one level, they were like, yeah, we kind of get that, but they were really disappointed because they wanted to confront him and be able to air their pain and their grievances and see justice that way. And so we actually asked the judge to allow us, over the protestations of defense counsel. Understandably, they said, yeah, our client's gone. The trial's, we're done here. He's dead. And we said, no, we'd like for the victims to have their day and be able to talk. And it was very cathartic. The judge, very inspired judge, Judge James Blanche, 3rd District Court, let them have their day, and it was healing. And I see that a lot with survivors, is that they're very resilient. They've suffered so much or degradation. They've suffered so much humiliation, and yet they find ways to help try to lift and protect others out. So the Victor Rax case was huge. It was the largest trafficking case in the Western United States, but it might have been in the United States ever at that time. And it opened up a lot of other cases. Shortly after that, we went after massage parlors. 4 different counties. We took down 7 different massage parlors that were using nationals from other countries, forcing them into sex with. And we just started to hit. Human trafficking. I was like, let's go. The legislature had given us authority and jurisdiction, and I had the resources to call on any law enforcement agency. And what was great was law enforcement sometimes can be territorial and turf wars, unfortunately. Every law enforcement agency was like, you know what, let's all get together, because none of us individually as agencies have the resources or expertise or manpower, but all together under the AG's task force, we can win this. We could actually start making a difference. So everybody came together, and it was a beautiful thing to see when everyone's rowing all, the same way. And we started to just knock it out. Someone recently, a human trafficking foundation, an anti-trafficking foundation, came to us and said, hey, we'd like to explore ways to alert landlords that the folks that we suspect that trafficking is going on. A lot of them are commercial real estate landlords who have someone who has a massage parlor. And the interesting thing, though, was that foundation was saying, hey, we use your cases as the textbook, and so do other states and other organizations. You guys, the Rax case, and then the multiple massage parlors case, all the way to a recent case that we just finished for human trafficking, illegal adoptions. There was an Arizona public elected official who was using his legal background and his understanding of the culture of the Marshall Islands to bring women here to have their children, promising them that they would get them back, but actually selling them illegally on an adoption black market. Now, the parents who ended up getting the kids had no idea it was illegal. They thought because of his position and because of his legal background that was all in the up and up, they were paying a lot of money, but many parents are willing to do that. And it's a good thing. They want to have kids. They didn't realize that they were victims. The birth mothers were victims, and certainly the children were victims. It was happening in Arizona, here in Utah, Arkansas. We led the investigation and the prosecution, and then we got him to he was convicted, or he agreed to plea in Arkansas, Arizona, and in Utah. So he's serving his federal sentence now. Then he'll come back to serve his state sentence in Utah. But there were about 15 other states that were affected because children from his illegal enterprise were placed all around there. Anyway, it could be sex trafficking and sex exploitation. It could be labor trafficking, which is in some ways even larger.
I was going to say, you don't think about that when you're thinking human trafficking. You're thinking the boys and girls.
Yeah.
But man,
rural areas, people are like, like Tooele. There's lots of rural parts of Tooele, and they're like, it can't happen out here. Well, that's actually a higher likelihood because they have agriculture. They have, it could be other types of farms, animal, plant, agriculture, and a lot of them are brought in to work in life-threatening conditions. Against their will, being exploited, their families being used, to threaten something will happen to them. So there's labor trafficking, there's organ harvesting, which again falls in the category of people like, that can't really be happening. But sadly, it is. And a lot of that happens on the dark web. So, I see all sorts of horrors every day on the internet that we have to go track down evildoers and criminals on. But then below that, the darkest recesses of mankind, you have the dark web. And a lot of that type of stuff happens there. Or, you want to buy other human beings' organs, and there's so many those different types of schemes, illegal adoptions, conscriptions. So I have my official duties where I oversee Utah's fight against human trafficking, and I work with other state AGs and other federal partners around the United States for our domestic trafficking cases. However, I also work with organizations like one that was started here in Utah called Operation Underground Railroad by my dear friend Tim Ballard, who left his position as a Homeland Security agent, who had done hundreds of trafficking cases on the border of the United States in other countries, but far too often had to pull back because there weren't American kids implicated in the case. And because of treaties and protocols and red tape, it was like, hey, Tim, if you can't prove they're American kids, let's bring them back. And Tim's philosophy was, I don't care at the end of the day if they're American kids or other kids, they're kids, and we have to go get them. And so he left his pension, he left his badge, and started in 2013, at the end of 13, Operation Underground Railroad. That's just when I came in to the office as AG. Tim actually was on our AG's task force, and so we collaborated, and I give him so much credit. He had the vision to build this global force. And essentially what we do on one side of the organization is we're confidential informants. Just like I would use a CI here in a domestic case, they can go in, gather information, they can help me and build a case. We do that in a number of countries. OUR is just one organization that I work with. I work with many of them, but OUR alone has been in over a dozen countries, many dozen countries. And the reason we're so effective is that, sadly, Americans are often the ones going down to those countries to pay for underage sex or exploiting children. So it's easy when you show up as an American, and the host countries love it because it's harder for them to infiltrate. They don't look American. They don't speak with the same exact accent. So we show up, we don't even have to try. They approach us. Hey, you want to buy little kids? Like, how many? And they treat it like it was, like you're ordering a slice of pizza. But you can order it up to your room. You want a virgin, you don't want something else. I'm sorry for the graphic nature of this. This is my world. And so hopefully if there are any kids watching, parents, I apologize. It's just the reality of what we see. And they're so callous, and they have hundreds of these kids that they sell, again, over and over and over for sex. And so in 2014, we did an operation down in Colombia that we did secretly with the Colombian government. We gave them all the credit. We went in, we went out. I'd say, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, it depends how you look at it, the media caught wind of it, and they started to write all sorts of stories. And Tim had a videographer take some of the video. And then we had a producer, Steven Spielberg's partner, who came in and produced a documentary based on that footage. And then OUR just went like supernova globally. And because of my work with them, I like to help on the side of meeting with governments. Many times, most of the time, the governments come here to Salt Lake City instead of going to LA or New York to talk to us about how to approach attacking human trafficking, laws that they need to pass, how to put together cases, how to prosecute them, what to do with our survivors once they're not victims anymore. They're now survivors. What happens? What do you do to make sure that they don't go back to that life? And OUR actually spends more of its resources on the aftercare side, helping. This is so rewarding. We recently funded scholarships for about a few, I don't know exactly how many, handful of the young girls that we rescued who were 13 or 14 back in 2014. Now they're 17, 18, 19 years old. They want to go to university. And we've been with them the whole time. We've helped get them educations. And so we're paying scholarships for them to get educated. We're going to be with them their entire lives to help protect them. But that's, for me, also a huge part of the equation. The sanctuary, making sure that they don't get punished by the law for being victims. For years, the law punished those victims more harshly than the trafficker. They were treated as if they were willing, voluntary participants in all of this. And so we've changed the laws in Utah. We're changing the laws in the United States. We're putting far more assets and resources towards victims. We put our victim advocate on a case at the very beginning. That used to be just an afterthought. It was like, let's go get the trafficker, and then whatever happens with the victims, we want to be nice to them. But no, now they're the focus. In fact, I have resisted filing cases under the human trafficking statute because it would have required me to put those victims on the stand and re-traumatize them and re-victimize them. But we've taken down the trafficking network using other means. Money laundering statute, white collar stuff, kind of like how Capone was taken down under tax evasion. If you can still take down the illegal enterprise but protect the victims in the process, that's what we've really focused on. So I've been on a number of ops. I want to be abundantly clear in case there are any Houtons who have a question about this. When I go do those operations with Tim, or I work with other organizations, Child Liberation Foundation, or many of them, could be a Polaris, I go on my own time, my own dime. I pay for everything. I work about 80 hours a week for the people of the state of Utah on average. During the legislative session, it could be up to 90 hours, 100 hours. But on the weekend, when the opportunity comes to go rescue kids, and the choices are, well, you can do all your chores from the honeydew list, maybe coach a basketball game, or go pull little girls and boys out of hell. Well, then I'm going to go do the latter and then double up my chores the next weekend. I'll have an assistant coach the basketball game. And so my family's been very supportive. I think my wife worries sometimes, and we have to be very careful. You can't immunize us from all danger, but we are very careful. We do these ops like we have former CIA assets, former FBI assets, Homeland Security, every agency you can think of. And we are very careful, and we work with the government. Sometimes it can take a year to build up, to put a case together before we actually go in and we'll do the rescue, because other governments have different laws, and we abide by their laws, their constitutions. But it's such an incredible thing to be able to liberate them. I remember those girls singing to us when we first rescued them in 2014. They were saying, "Thank you, Americans. God bless you. God bless America." And usually they thought we were there to rape them and abuse them, and then all of a sudden we took down the traffickers. We were arrested with the bad guys. Law enforcement processes the bad guys, takes the shackles off of us, and we get to fly home. But before that, we talked to the young victims. There were some boys, but mostly young girls. About a couple weeks ago, and I can't tell you all the details, I can't tell you what country, but Tim's given me permission to talk about this. Tim and I stayed here in Utah, and from our command center at a secret location that we have here, Tim took the Alpha team, I took the Bravo team. We had 2 teams on the ground in this challenged country, third world country, but we had eyes on them because of a number of different video resources that we could see. We could see what was happening in and around their area, and because of satellite feeds, we can tell them, hey, kind of bogeys coming from the right or the left, so watch out for this. In some ways, it was actually much more liberal, because when you're on the ground in those situations and you can't see what's happening everywhere else, it's a little disconcerting. Here, you can see everything, and so Tim's talking them through one side, and I'm talking my guys through. They all have code names. This guy that I know and love, his code name was Tubman, and it was so great to see Harriet Tubman leading these victims that we rescued, to safety on our big board. So we rescued a handful, almost a dozen, what we thought were young girls at the time. It turns out that they're actually overage, but they were women from Venezuela and women from the Dominican Republic. Some of them were like accountants. They're professionals that had been duped and tricked. They thought they were going to volunteer to do service at a foundation organization. All of a sudden, they're whisked away, taken to a different country, and with a gun to their head, forced to have sex with any American or others that would come down there. The sound of their voice, when we finally got them, and there were all sorts of different challenges when you're dealing with different governments, even when they're on your side, half the time they don't know the right hand what the left hand is doing. And we get these girls out and we put them on, and I had a friend call them who's from Venezuela, because I wanted them to hear a Venezuelan voice. I knew that there were some from Venezuela. I didn't know that there were some from the DR, or I would have put my son, who just came home from his mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the Dominican Republic, I would have put him on. But when they heard somebody speaking their language, and we all speak Spanish, but not with the same exact, I wanted it to be someone from home saying, you're coming home now. We've got you. We're never going to let you back into the clutches of those people. The sounds that they made, I can't describe to you. The joy, the exhilaration, the exultation, the cheering, the screaming, the crying, man, is unbelievable. And, that's what a committed band of, people who are aware of the problem and the situation. OUR has supporters around the world. And I'm not here to, to fundraise for OUR. I'm just telling you that is one organization that I know that I've worked with. And if you want to check them out, the viewers, you can go to OUR Rescue online. You can check out Child Liberation Foundation, another organization that I've done rescues with. You can check out Polaris Project. You can check out, it's an incredible guy named Jerome Elam, who is a former victim as a young boy, trafficked by a stepfather for sex, abused from the time that he was an adolescent all the way to his teens, joined the Marines, is one of the greatest advocates for young boys and victims in the country. He has an organization called the Trafficking in America Task Force. Laura Lederer, who's led this fight for 25 years, some of the first laws nationally and internationally. There's so many incredible people in the fight against human trafficking. My former chief of staff that you know well, Missy Larson, who helped me set up so many of our programs, a guy named Chris Gay, who's a dear brother and friend down in Africa, pulling girls out of situations where, they're being terrorized by Boko Haram or other organizations and getting them out of the way. Tim's organization, I'll leave you with this one again, because forewarning, is graphic. Again, they've done rescues where they've posed as medical professionals, because there are many traffickers who will pose as the Red Cross around the world. They might be in Africa and say, "Bring your villagers to us, we'll heal them." Everybody recognizes the Red Cross, so they come. And what they really do is they extract their organs, whether they're alive or not, or they sew them back up and say, "Sorry, we weren't able to heal your loved one. So they died of whatever natural causes." But they immediately are selling those on the black market around the world. And it's that kind of horror that exists, that kind of disregard for human life and the innocence of children. So whether it's organ harvesting, whether it's conscription, I think UNICEF has said that there have been 300,000 or so, they estimate, just in the last decade, of kids conscripted into militias, in different countries. And if you grab a 7-year-old and you teach them hate and you give them skills with weapons, I mean, they can turn into lethal killing machines, and then illegal adoptions, and of course the big ones: labor trafficking and exploitation, indentured servitude, and sex trafficking and exploitation. And it happens, again, everywhere. I don't want people to curl up in a fetal position. I just want them to recognize it. We have some incredible celebrity friends: Marisol Nichols, Tony Robbins, the coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Coach Mike. He's been incredible, who use their celebrity to raise awareness around the world. Coach Tomlin, Mike Tomlin. And it takes, I think, not just our village coming together, but some of the most recognizable people. So I'm really glad that if you go into many airports now in the United States, you'll hear Hartsfield in Atlanta. It's a constant, almost refrain about being aware of human trafficking, to educate the rest of us, but also to give hope to the victims who might be coming through there. And that's why we have airline ambassadors and truckers against trafficking and hotel heroes, all of these industries. I had a group of chiropractors last week from Utah that want to come together and create a national chiropractic, initiative against human trafficking. So I am so glad that these cases are getting awareness, that Jeffrey Epstein, that people are outraged about that. Yeah. Even there was some of the cases, not everything you hear is true. I mean, people will, accusations of human trafficking can be used as a form of bullying just like anything else. Do I believe that certain furniture companies are human trafficking is because they're selling overpriced furniture? I haven't seen any evidence, so I'm going to reserve judgment on that. I don't think so. But the fact that, in fact, in some ways, I don't want people reporting human trafficking if it doesn't exist. At the same time, I don't want them not reporting. So if you're going to err on the side, go ahead and report. Say, something's wrong. I just don't feel my spidey sense is tingling. It might not be human trafficking. It could be any number of other crimes. Or if it's not, we'd rather look at it and find out that it was nothing. So in some ways, I'm glad that people are talking about it. They're talking about it on Reddit. They're talking about it in social media and other forms. And our current president has been very supportive. He's put hundreds of millions of dollars towards it. And I appreciate many of the leaders in his cabinet who've they have allocated resources. I'll give you one. Elaine Chao is a good example, or Secretary of Transportation. She has initiatives focused on fighting human trafficking just from her agency. And again, truckers can be some of our best eyes and ears around the country to help us see that kind of activity. So I have got to jump off.
I know
here,
you do. Hey, I appreciate your time. Man, I appreciate the stories. For parents that are hearing this, I mean, it makes us alert, makes us aware of what's going around so we can watch our kids better when they're on the internet and things like that to keep them safe. So I really do appreciate you. Yeah. I appreciate you finding the time to meet with me today and do this, and for all you do for the state of Utah, because man, we couldn't ask for a better AG. So thank you very much. And
God bless you, brother, and all of your viewers and listeners out there. Thanks for having me on.
And guys, I appreciate you coming back for another week. If you're in a spot where you're feeling like you're in a bad spot and having those scary thoughts come to mind, call the hotline, call the lifeline, 1-800-273-8255. And again, a big shout out to our sponsors of the podcast, GTM Builders and 8 Warner Homes Real Estate. We appreciate you, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, John.